Today's episode of What's on Your Bookshelf is brought to you by Insignia Training Partners, the leaders in outsourced L&D talent and resources. Insignia is a full-service learning and development company that provides L&D talent to design, develop, and deploy your training solutions. Insignia specializes in providing the right resources for your projects at a fraction of the cost as opposed to bringing on new full-time employees. This includes fractional Chief Learning Officer services for enterprise training strategy, instructional designers to develop your training content and materials, facilitators to deliver in-person or virtual training to your staff, LMS administrators to manage the process, virtual training producers to make sure your virtual training is engaging and effective, and coaches to support the learning after training is completed. If you don't have a training department, that's okay. Insignia can be your bolt-on training department. With Insignia, you get dedicated resources providing fractional services by specialists in their field. Whether it's onboarding new hires, upskilling your team, or ensuring compliance, Insignia designs impactful programs that stick. Visit insigniatraining.com to discover their full range of services and to schedule a free consultation. Insignia is your partner for training success.
Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo and Samantha Powell.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf, Life and Leadership Podcast, where we are living out loud the pages of the books on our bookshelves. My name's Denise Russo. I'm here with my co-host, Sam Powell. And before we get into the book that we're kicking off today, I just have to say, Sam, how exciting it was last week for us to preclude what today is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is officially our 100th episode. So very exciting. So we interrupted a little bit last week to celebrate, but I can't believe we have 100 episodes. And it happened to coincidentally fall on day one of episode one of a whole new book, the first book of 2025. So I'm very excited to kick this off and to talk about the 5 bold choices today. And today we're going to be going through the introductory chapter section of this book. And I think this is going to be an interesting book for people.
Absolutely. So if you missed our very first episode of the year, that was on January 1. So go back and listen to that episode. It's a super short one, but it's where we announce all of the books for 2025 that we'll be going through. There's only 4 of them, and that will give you an opportunity to get those books if you'd like to take your own deep dives into these books with us together. This book that we're going to share kicking off today, The 5 Bold Choices, it's by these 2 guys, Jay Coughlin and Larry Julian. What I love about this book is it's about rising above your circumstances and redefining your life. So we talked about last year how to navigate happiness despite circumstances. The year before that, we talked about how to build healthy habits and good leadership values in your life. This book is a really nice, short, well laid out book that will help us together walk through things that they call 5 bold choices. And we're going to start today with just simply the intro. So I'm curious, Sam, for you, as we picked this book up as our very first one for the year, what do you think you could share with the listeners about why this one comes first?
Yeah, so our theme for the year is breaking boundaries, right? Taking bold moves for a resilient life. So I think this is the 5 bold choices. So these are what they call, a guidebook for anyone who feels stuck and wants to get back into the path. And in the book and in this introduction, they say that the 5 bold choices about helping you find or reclaim the real life you've been called to lead by helping you break through the barriers that prevent you from realizing your untapped potential. And so to break through these barriers, and for us, we're breaking boundaries this year, these are the 5 bold things that they think you need to do every day to really push past that. So this is, I think, starting the year out very purposefully in a simple but bold, action-oriented way of, of living your life, of doing things, and of thinking about things. And this book's interesting because it's two authors, and it's not two authors that have some blended voice throughout the book. It's like one chapter is, or like one subchapter is one of them talking, the other one is the other one talking. So it's an interesting book because you're really getting two different voices. You know who's talking to you when you're doing it. It's two different stories and two different perspectives. So it's a really interesting, I don't know, it's a very easy read because it's broken down into like little bits and pieces that you can, read it for 5 minutes, put it down, read it for 5 minutes, put it down. So this is a great one if you have like a very busy life and you want to read through, but this one's, very approachable in that space, which I think is also really nice as you kick off the year and you're busy with everything you're trying to get started in 2025 here.
I like how you painted the picture because I think that's what we also do on our show together. We're reading these books at the same time with one another, but the way we share how we're living it out loud is different at your house than it is from my house. We don't even live in the same state. And so I think it's a really good description for how these two people could still be looking at the same topic. Now we are two people looking at the same topic and sharing it with all of you that are going to be looking at the same topic as well. When I picked up this book, it's not a new book. It came out in 2016. And I was actually told about this book because someone was sharing with me about how they saw that I was a person that seemed to rise above obstacles, and my outlook on life is that there's always an opportunity. And there had been a really significant obstacle in my life in 2009 where my home and neighborhood were destroyed in a very terrible flood. And so I often have shared with people about how I navigated that experience. And we all have our own experiences that feel like an overwhelming flood to our own lives. It could be a loss of a job or a loss of a loved one or loss of a relationship, or maybe just something went sideways in our career. And so this book is really about some solid ideas to not just make your job better, but it's really about looking at your life and your leadership, which we say is about the principle of what's on your bookshelf. It's a life and leadership podcast where we live out loud the pages of the books that are on our shelf. And this is to help your personal and your professional life just get elevated from where it is today to where maybe you want it to be tomorrow. And so I love how this chapter in the intro started out by saying that the authors together believe that overcoming difficulties and failures through the lens of an opportunity are the stepping stones to a life of significance instead of obstacles to be avoided. We both are John Maxwell certified coaches and trainers. And one of the things that John teaches is that you no longer really can appreciate just success, whatever you determine success is in business or in life, once you've tasted a life of significance. And so this is about living a life of significance, not just success and not just failure. And yet he starts out the book by saying there are some times in life when we just feel stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's really what this year's about for us, right? Is we set the stage last year of what does it take to get into happiness and live a life that is fulfilling and live a life that is intentional and live a life that really does bring you joy. But the reality is life happens, right? There's pain and failure and shame and negative self-talk and things that happen. And so this is, the beginning of how do you move past that? How do you overcome and how do you appreciate the journey and find happiness in the journey despite the challenges that come your way and despite everything? And the argument that they make is to do that, you've got to every day make these 5 bold choices that, we'll dive deep into. So this is the intro of all of that, but the episodes that will follow will all be a choice at a time, one of the 5, and we'll deep dive into those spaces. But I like how this is laid out because, like I said, it's 2 authors. So Jay really comes in and talks about how to get from point A to point B. He introduces the 5 bold choices, like he kind of gives you the practical piece of it. And then Larry comes in and talks about like supplemental like thoughts and commentary on like a wide range of leaders and their thoughts and things like that. So it's really interesting to get this multiple perspective. And like you said, it kind of feels like what we do and what we're trying to accomplish here. So it's an interesting layout, but this introduction starts out with a story of Jay's where, this reminded me of like the Mo Gaudat story. Like this kind of begins in tragedy, and Jay's story sort of begins in tragedy, where he and his father were out and about and spent a day hunting, having a good time, went to the bar, had some drinks, had too much to drink. Jay drove home and they got in an accident and his father was killed. He was hospitalized with severe injuries. And so when he woke up in the hospital, he had to now live with this reconciliation that, he was driving under the influence and his father, died, and he had to, right, there's consequences for that from like a legal standpoint, from, a state standpoint, but this is really his journey on the other side of that, of how do you move forward despite obstacles. So to me, there was like a little bit of callback to the Mo Gaudat story of like, we're starting out very tragically. Mm-hmm. And this is about how you reclaim in Mo's, in the Solve for Happy with Mo Gaudat, it was how do you reclaim happiness? How do you get to this place where you can re-find happiness all the time? And here it's how do you reclaim a life that is purposeful and is meaningful. And, I think we all go through that, right? We have these, you've got your flood story. I've lost my son. There's, lots of things in all of our lives that feel like these, how do you move past it moments? And there's this kind of idea of reclaiming, of making the choice to move forward, of doing the things that you needed to do in order to thrive on the other side of it. And, he said here, there were defining moments that required a bold choice that helped me endure the worst times and find my true potential in the process. And I think that that's really what this book is about, is you clinging to those moments that are choices. Is, do I sit here and wallow in the thing that happened, or do I make the choice to take the next step to move forward?
Mm-hmm. I recently have been going through a certification for a program called Fierce Conversations. And in one part of this program, the presentation or the teaching talks about this book from Ernest Hemingway called The Sun Also Rises. Have you heard of this book? Mm-hmm. It's known as one of his best works. In fact, the book was written in 1926, but relevant even today. And so there is this scene in the book where it's these 2 guys, they're expatriates, are sitting in a bar out of the country from wherever it is they both live. And the bar is lively and the conversation is just a normal kind of bar conversation. But at one point the conversation turns and one guy looks over to his friend that he's met along his journey. And he just sort of pauses and he says to this guy, "How did you go bankrupt?" So you can imagine, like, wow, where did that come from in this lively conversation? It suddenly turns. Right. And this guy named Mike, he turns to his friend and he says, "You know what? So I went bankrupt gradually, but then suddenly." And so the idea is that our life is lived through a lot of choices gradually. And so when something happens, like the car accident in this book that seemed sudden, it was a series of choices that were made that led up to that car accident happening. And maybe for you listening on this episode, you didn't have something that tragic, or like the stories that we've shared. It could be something as simple as you're just in a dead-end job where you have security because you get paid on Friday, but you're no longer fulfilled and happy and growing, and maybe you can't wait for Friday and you dread Monday. But what this book lays out is 3 principles. Number 1 is that Sometimes the difficulties and the failures that you avoid and fight are the very portals to your success and significance in life. And so sometimes you have to confront all of those choices so that instead of having what you've always had, you can have something you've always wanted. There has to be a change. There has to be a shift into something different if you want something different in your life. Number two is that you really can't overcome life's challenges on your own. And if you have a realistic plan, a process, and a support system, you can get there. I know this is big for you, Sam, because you're a big process person, and that's what we walked through, especially in Atomic Habits, which was having a plan and a process to follow. Even when we looked at all of the books through the happiness series last year, they were about having a system and a process and some tools. And the best way to do it is also through having an engagement with a certified and qualified business coach that can guide you along the way. Number three is that everyone's story matters. So you're going to hear about the story of these two authors. Our entire podcast is Sam and I telling stories about how we're living these pages out loud, but everyone's story matters. And so your story of perseverance or overcoming will hopefully help you to not only realize your potential, and we talk a lot about this potential, passion, and purpose, but that you'll inspire maybe even others to leave a lasting impact to those of that you have around you. I know that when we started this podcast, we really weren't doing it to impact listeners. We were doing it for our own self-awareness, our own personal growth, our own development. But what we have found, especially as we celebrate today with 100 episodes, is that there have been thousands of people listening to these episodes for 100 times in a row. So we hope that this book will also continue to add value to you as we share these stories. And so there's some critical areas that we're going to explore, because if you don't have something that makes you uncomfortable, it's easier to just stay where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, as there's a quote in this book where he says, life's challenges demand your response, and that response defines your character and determines your destiny. Difficulty is an essential part of our story. It calls us to overcome, persevere, and share our story to inspire others. And I think it reminds me of like a meme I see floating around on the internet all the time. I don't know if it's a meme, but like a quote that floats around that's, like, tell the story of how you climbed the mountain because it will become someone else's guidebook. And I think that that's really it. Like, no one gets through this life without facing challenging times and challenging moments. And sometimes those are very large, and sometimes those are just a lot of little things, right? Mm-hmm. Overcoming, things from your past, overcoming, these little moments, but that, it, like they say here in this quote, like, it demands a response. You have to do something, and what you choose to do, because this book's about choices that you make, really determines your character. And it says it determines your destiny, which also reminds me of Atomic Habits, where, that you should be far more concerned with your trajectory than your current location, right? You should be far more concerned with how the choices you're making today affect the destiny that, it will come after that, the path that it puts you on, the trajectory that you now live on. And then they kind of move right on to say, and I love it, I highlighted this little part in it. It's like, we all reach turning points that define the direction of our lives. Some big, but mostly small. And if you really think about that, right, that's what we learned in Atomic Habits, is it's these little changes, these little things that you do consistently that really make a big difference, right? Like, here we are at episode 100, and this was just recording one episode at a time, over and over again, having just this little bit of consistency, right? Like, meeting every week, recording some episodes, doing all of this. Like, we got to this point, like, I had a baby in this time too. Like, I mean, we've done all of this through just these little moments, the choice to continue to meet, the choice to continue to push through. And here we are, 100 episodes in. Like, that's a huge accomplishment. That's a great, that's a great thing. But I love that they say that, like, there are some big turning points, but most of them are small. And I think that that's what we found as we explored happiness. It's the little things that you do all the time. It's the little things that you do every day that make the big difference. So while we're talking about bold choices, it's bold choices in little moments, I think.
I agree with you. And I would like to add that one of the things I appreciate that the author shares is that this is not just a manual that says, okay, go do this. Part of the bold choice, and we talk about this in the theme of our entire year, is about bold resilience and bold choices that lead to a resilient life. We introduced that on January 1. So again, if you missed that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. But here's the thing, is the authors say that to rise above your difficulty and to get back on track, it requires not just action, but courageous action, or let's call it bold action, because bold choices aren't just about the doing. In the way the authors describe this, I put stars and underlined and highlighted the whole thing. It says it requires wisdom, patience, determination, and perseverance. So this starts, as we often talk about, first in your thoughts, the wisdom part, in the belief system that you have about the things that you're thinking. Sometimes those beliefs take patience and determination, but those thoughts and beliefs are what turn into our actions. And you could take one action, but if you don't have an atomic habit, you aren't going to persevere through the actions. You just won't. Here we are in January. You may have made a resolution that you want to lose weight, get in shape, all the things that everybody says in January. You know, research says most people quit them before February. So this is going to take perseverance. And while this type of action is not easy, it's what's going to change your life.
Yeah. And I love that he really defines that courageous action as everyday moral courage of choosing the harder right path over the easier wrong one through small acts of bravery and persistence each day, right? And I think that that's what we learned in Atomic Habits. We saw that in Gretchen Rubin's The Happiness Project, right? Like she did a year's worth of resolutions. Like here we are in January. If you are looking for a guidebook on how to do resolutions through a whole year, like go back and check out The Happiness Project, because she's got it laid out for you on ways to do that. But it's this everyday choice. It's these everyday little things that you decide. And it's these little acts of bravery, these little acts of persistence and perseverance that really get us to this bold life that we're meant to live.
At the end of this section, which I love throughout the entire book, again, these books are meant to be lived out loud, which means, remember in Coach Wooden's series, he said, drink deeply from good books. In fact, I recall on the pre-call that you and I were having, Sam, we were talking about how the very early episodes that we did with this podcast, they were just sort of like advertisements of other people's books. It wasn't until we took the deep dive, the way Coach Wooden taught, that we were able to really, chew on this material, digest it, live it out loud. And so I'm curious for you, when you think about what we see in the discussion guide, was there for you a defining moment in your past that changed something about the trajectory of your life?
There's a lot of those. I think like I could pick out a whole bunch of them that really adjust. And I think that that's the interesting thing, right? It's like something happened and I made this choice that put me in a whole different path than the other, right? Like, so one that stands out to me is where I ended up choosing to go for college. So like when I first started high school, I was at a really big high school, where it's hundreds and hundreds of kids in a graduating class and all that sort of stuff. And then in between my freshman and sophomore year, we moved. And when we moved, I went to a very small high school, less than 100 kids in a graduating class, right? So it was this huge change. But through that experience, I realized that the environment that I enjoy being in more than anything else is a smaller, more intimate environment, right? I like building relationships with all of the people around me. I like being a big fish in a little sea rather than a little fish in a big sea. And some people feel the exact opposite, right? And want the opportunities of, huge environments and things like that. But I learned through this experience that like, didn't expect to learn this, that I liked the different things. So when it came time 3 years later to choose where I was going to go to school to continue my education, I specifically targeted smaller places. I knew I didn't want to go somewhere really big. That wasn't the environment that I felt at that time in my life that I really thrived in, because of, all the things that I learned through these various experiences. And so like that, I think, is one example. And I think a lot of people have stories like that. And then I've had things that have just completely redefined how I view the world, and, huge events that, kind of change. But when I think about some of these things, like, aren't that, I don't know, it's just like you come across some new experience in life, and it changes your perspective to say, oh, what I want now is something different. I deal with this with clients all the time. They get halfway through their career, because I work with mid-career professionals. They get halfway through their career and realize, this is not what I want, right? The trajectory I'm on is not the one that I'm looking for. So when I think about like that question that you asked, that's what I think about, is we get to these moments in life, we get to these little experiences that add up, that make us realize where we're headed is maybe just different than we thought it was going to be originally. Oh, I always thought I would be or do or whatever. And then I realized one day, after a series of lots of little things happening, or maybe something big happening, that's actually not what I want. And that's okay. And that takes courage and bravery and boldness to accept that change in yourself, and then to go after it.
Mm-hmm. When I think about all of the things that were trajectories in my own life, thinking back quickly on them, it was that I was stuck and I wanted to be unstuck. And I had a mentor once say, stuck stinks. And it sure does. It actually makes me think about something that maybe will give you an analogy that will be relevant to whatever your situation is where you're stuck. So I was hanging up a picture. Well, actually, I wasn't hanging it up. I was re-hanging it up. And I'll tell you what happened was I had this picture on the wall, and it was held up by, those like command strips that you can put, and then to get them off, it's really hard to get them off, and rips the paint off the wall. So they say they don't rip the paint off the wall. They do, unless you're just not taking the tape off the right way, which clearly I wasn't. But what happened was I was sitting peacefully doing something in the house. Maybe I was reading a book, or I'm not sure what I was doing. But all of a sudden, I heard this loud crash in my house. And I thought, what in the world? Like, what has crashed? So think about this. For months, this picture was hanging on my wall, and it was fine. It was there. It had these strips that are supposed to keep things up on the wall. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, it was stable. And for a long time, nothing changed. But remember the story I was telling earlier about gradually and then suddenly? It must have been that gradually, the way maybe the air conditioner was blowing down, or maybe just the heaviness and the weight or the burden of this painting on that little tape strip was weighing it down. And over time, just like how when water can go over a rock or something like that things change in life, it just had enough. It was like the camel's back broke.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing crashed. And it seemed like it happened suddenly, but it was that it really happened over this time. And so I just want to challenge you as we go through this book, because we're almost done for today, that you may not realize that the reason that you're stuck is something that has happened for a long time. And you're going to have to make a bold choice. And the very first bold choice that we're going to talk about next week is about clarity and making sure that the important things are really the most important things to you, and how we approach that. So Sam, anything else to tie us up for today?
I love that this book, each like chapter or section, ends with a discussion guide, but what it is like 5 questions for yourself to really think about, which I love because I do a weekly newsletter, and in that I do a coaching corner, which always has 5 questions in it for you to think about, just kind of get outside of yourself. So if you don't have the book, get the book, because this is a great one to think through and write notes in and all that sort of good stuff. But I would like to leave everybody with the last question of this discussion guide, which is, what bold choice can you make to move yourself closer to your better tomorrow? So what choice could you make today that moves you to your better tomorrow? And I think that is such an interesting thing. And especially as we move to clarity next week, that's where I start all coaching engagements. That's where I start all conversations when somebody asks for advice or help or whatever, is let's get clear on what's important to you. What do you want? What does that look like? And I'm excited to explore that next week with you.
Absolutely. Friends, if this is adding value to you, please consider subscribing. We found out from Scott, our producer, that if you are subscribing, but you miss an episode or 2 along the way, you may not be getting the alert of the episode. So I'd encourage you to just go back in and make sure that you're subscribed. If you have a friend or a colleague or someone you care about that can get value from this, please share our episodes with them. And we also would love to hear from you. There's so many of you who have communicated with us over our time together. And so hearing how you are living these things out loud is just as important to us. Sam, happy 100th anniversary today. I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait to dive into more next week. So friends, for today, my name's Denise Russo, and on behalf of my friend Sam Powell, thanks for being with us for our 100th episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.